Hello and welcome. My name's Samantha and this is the Learn to Heal podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Learn to Heal podcast. I'm your host, Sam. Today, I want to talk about chi, because if you've ever heard the word before, it's usually explained as energy. But that translation's actually caused a lot of confusion, and chi was never really meant to be energy in the way that we think about energy today. Because when Chinese medicine was first translated into English, the closest word translators could find was energy. So that word kind of stuck. But if we go back to the original meaning of qi and the character of qi, it actually translates much more closely to gas or vapor. And it's described as something light, something that's moving, something that rises, something that spreads. And that might sound strange at first, but when you look at modern biology, it actually starts to make a lot more sense. Qi as vapor or gas, inside the human body, we produce these signaling gases called gasotransmitters. And these include things like nitric oxide and other tiny gas molecules, but nitric oxide is really being looked at the most. And they are fascinating because they don't behave like normal chemicals. They're not hormones and they're not really like nerve signals, but there's something in between. And these gases can actually move straight through cell membranes. They don't need a receptor. They don't need a channel system to move in, like the blood circulatory system. They simply diffuse through tissues. They can move, which means they can spread information very quickly throughout the body. And what they do is incredibly important because they help to regulate things like blood flow, nerve signaling, digestion, immune responses, lymphatic movement, and really all the communication between all the tissues. So in other words, they help coordinate the whole body itself is coordinated by the movement of these gases. And when the system moves well, when these signaling gases are balanced and they're moving well, then the body tends to regulate itself beautifully and everything functions as it should. So blood flows where it needs to go. The tissues receive that nourishment. Nerves communicate properly. There's no misfiring. The immune system responds appropriately and everything seems to flow smoothly. In Chinese medicine language, we would say that's when qi is flowing well. When movement changes, though, just like pressure in a plumbing system, these gases can change direction or they can accumulate in certain areas. Sometimes they build up in an area and other times they become low or depleted in other areas. And when that happens, the body starts to experience problems with function. So you might start seeing things like when pressure builds up in an area, you might get pain or you might get swelling. In the digestive system, you might get gas and bloating. You might get poor circulation. You might get nerve irritation and pain or fatigue because the system no longer is communicating and regulating everything properly. Now, Chinese medicine describes this as qi stagnation, when things are stuck in an area, or when it's it's deficient. We use those words, different words, but they often describe the same shift in movement and in signaling. Now, what does this mean for acupuncture? This is where it gets really interesting because research shows that these gasotransmitters just so happen to appear in higher concentration around acupuncture points. So these points seem to act almost like a tiny signaling hubs in the body. So when a needle's placed into one of these points, it creates very small mechanical changes in the tissue underneath. And that change appears to influence how these gases move and diffuse around the surrounding area, which means acupuncture may help to redistribute these signaling gases where they're needed. So if there's too much pressure in one area, the needles can release that pressure, almost acting like a little vent, and restore the movement. And if there is low levels in another area, it calls for the gas to move into those low areas. So acupuncture really does help diffusion. And one of the reasons acupuncture can influence the body in so many ways, in so many different systems, is because of the effect of these gases. The gases interact with the nervous system, the lymphatic system, the blood vessels. They affect nerve signaling, so pain perceptions. And that's why part of the body's internal communication network can be so vast. Why needles might feel a bit different, and this is something I explain often to patients. Some needles you can feel more than others. And sometimes when a needle goes in, you can barely feel it at all. And other times you might feel pressure or warmth, heaviness, or a dull ache. Those are all great words to describe what sometimes you can feel. And one possible explanation for this is the areas with gas buildup or pressure respond more strongly. So where we've got a lot of gas, we've got stagnation or congestion, the tissues can be more sensitive. And in areas where there's low signaling or depleted gas, the needles can feel much quieter, or there's not much you can feel initially when they go in. Again, this reflects the idea of an excess in one place and a deficiency in another. Something Chinese medicine has described for thousands of years. So let's talk about the treatment time. Another thing people commonly ask is why acupuncture sessions last around 20 minutes. It's not random. It's really the time that it takes to respond. The body needs to respond to these signals that are created by the needles. So when we place needles, it begins to shift like a circuit. It does a circuit of the body, and it redistributes these signals and regulates the communication and restores the pressure and the balance. So you can think of it like a communication system and resetting the circuits. The needles really start the conversation, and then the body takes over is the best way to think about it. Now, one important thing to say, and one thing I want to be really clear about, this gasotransmitter explanation, it's not the whole story of qi. Qi is a much broader concept in Chinese medicine, and it describes movement, transformation, function, warmth, protection, communication, and there is also an emotional aspect, an energetic aspect. So what I'm sharing today is simply one modern biological lens, if you like, that helps us explain part of how acupuncture works. And it's helpful because it shows that these ancient observations were describing something very real about how the body regulates itself. They just used a different language. So when you hear that word qi, instead of imagining something mythical or magical, just think about it as movement of these gases. Think about communication inside the body. When we take breath in, when we take food in, that is transformed into these gases, and those gases influence immune system, the circulatory system, all of those systems. These tiny gases help direct that process. And when that movement is smooth, the body tends to function well. And when movement becomes stuck, excessive or depleted in some areas, that's when symptoms can start to appear. And the role of acupuncture really, it's not to force the body in to heal. It's about restoring communication. It's about putting the body in the best possible chance to regulate itself. So qi was never really meant to be this mysterious, mythical thing. It's simply a way of describing the invisible processes that keep the body alive and regulating itself. And modern science is now discovering that some of those processes involve subtle signaling gases moving through the body. Different language, different framework, but often describing the same living intelligence. And maybe that's the simplest way to think about qi. not as something mythical, but as life in motion. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening.